The Prime Minister today spoke to the American president to try and flatten out some of the wrinkles in the trade dispute. Let's start there with Colin Robertson, former diplomat and vice president at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Colin, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you again, Marilla.
So we get the same message from these meetings that the conversations have been productive, but how much stock do you put into these chats?
Well, they're important because you've got to have dialogue in order to achieve any kind of progress. And ultimately, it's Prime Minister talking to President that usually settles these things. This is a vast, complex trading relationship. We have an agreement in place. And much of the trade that we're doing today is covered by it. And so despite the fact the United States has put 35% tariff on us, about 90% of what we export to the United States is actually what we call compliant with USMCA or CUSMA, as we call it in Canada. So that part of it is working. But what we would like and what Canadian business wants is the guarantee of longer term stability, because this is handicapping investment in Canada from Mr. Carney's. One of his priorities, of course, is to build Canada. And to do that, we need both domestic investment and foreign investment. And they're not likely to want to make these decisions until there is clear sense of what the relationship with Canada's biggest trading partner is.
We do know that the 35% applies to things, as you mentioned, that are not covered under CUSMA. That being said, even this week, it was announced that steel and aluminum products in other products, so if you have like a wind turbine we talked about, or motorcycle that has steel and aluminum from Canada in it, that then gets shipped across the border, that is also going to be tariffed as well. So it does seem like Donald Trump is not easing his look at applying tariffs to Canada.
No, and it's what that does at the border, the customs agents on either side and the customs inspectors. This makes their life terribly miserable, and it slows down what used to be just-in-time deliveries. And the supply chains, which of course are vital between Canada and the United States, so much of our trade is actually supply chain or intra-company. We reckon about 70% of our trade is parts that go back and forth, particularly in the case of the auto trade. And so when you, as you describe it, trying to tariff these things that are put in Canada, that just complicates that whole supply chain and makes things more difficult.
The U.S. and Europe shared a few more details about their trade framework, generally 15% for European products with some exceptions. Would you see this as a win for Europe?
Well, I think the Europeans, like us, want to have stability. And so what the business community in Europe were telling their leaders, tell us what it's going to be. We can deal with it once you put it in. We'll factor in 15%, better 15% than 30% or 35%. We'll deal with it, and then we can get on with it. There is, of course, unhappiness about certain aspects, and from different countries, the French in particular are unhappy. But I think they've now got the sense that they have an agreement, although with Donald Trump, as we know, nothing is ever certain.
As you know, there is a promise by Europe to buy $750 billion worth of American energy. That's part of what they agreed on. When they make those kind of pledges, is there a penalty if they don't, or does, I mean, the U.S. would obviously keep track, I imagine, but what happens if Europe doesn't live up to that commitment?
We don't know that. In the case of China, the Chinese promised during Trump 1 to buy a lot more than they actually did. Was there a penalty? Doesn't appear to be. I think it takes a while for these things to work their way through. But as you say, certainly there will be efforts to determine whether what's taking place, if the Europeans begin to recover, they are going to need more energy. So the United States, as a reliable supplier, would be that would be a logical place to get it. And of course, some of that oil and gas is refined. Comes from Canada and is refined in the United States and then sold on to Europe, which of course makes the argument why we should be looking to get pipelines, particularly to our East Coast.
Will that commitment to the U.S. and American energy then take away from our bottom line in Canada?
On the part of the Europeans?
On the part of energy being bought from the U.S. by the Europeans?
No, because the Americans still want our energy because, again, as I mentioned, we make the United States energy independent because we're selling so much of our own energy to them, which is then refined and then sold on to Europeans and elsewhere. And I think we we have an opportunity now with Mr. Carney's approach, if the premiers and the prime minister can agree on building pipelines so we would bypass the United States.
Let me also ask you how long you think it'll take for Canada to get to some sort of trade agreement with the U.S., knowing that CUSMA is up for renegotiation next year.
Well, that's the what, $2.5 billion, $3 billion a day in trade question. When will this happen? We are negotiating, as you've reported, on almost daily basis. Our ambassador, who is a skilled trade negotiator, is daily working on this, and Dominic LeBlanc, our trade minister, has been down there frequently. It is a big, complex trading relationship. We are the U.S.'s biggest export market, but we do have a framework in place. The CUSMA, which Donald Trump once proclaimed as the best trade deal ever, will be the basis for whatever we come up with. We hope sooner than later, again, because we need that assurance for Canadian investment to make domestic decisions.